So last but not least, we're getting ready to cover compliance. We've got two more rock stars here with us today, Dr. Dolores Cucina Messina and Jeff Shapiro. So Dolores, thank you so much for joining us today. I'll be quiet and let you say what you want to here.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Dolores Cucina Messina. I am the CEO and founder of Rixata Solutions, providing creative contract solutions for government and organizations, small to medium businesses, and also just a huge contracts nerd. So it's an honor to be here among all of the speakers and also with everyone that's listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Dolores. And Jeff Shapiro, you've spoken in some of our webinars in the past, I know. So Jeff, thanks for joining us today, and the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Jennifer. So glad to be back here today. Thrilled to be talking about one of my favorite topics, just like Dolores. I'm a compliance and contract nerd myself too, so happy to join that social group. Anyhow, I'm a partner at Cohn Resnick. We're a large national CPA and business advisory firm. I'm a partner within the government contracting practice. We provide a wide range of advisory services for government contractors, as well as being a government contractor ourselves. We serve as the contract auditing specialist team to oversee a number of civilian agencies' contract audit needs, and looking forward to providing my perspective today.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And okay, as we said, Dolores and Jeff are covering compliance. I'm going to put myself on mute, and you guys just let me know when you're ready for your next slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So wanted to do just a quick overview and a visual for everyone here about, what does privity of contract mean? And when we're talking about the subcontractor and prime relationship, it could mean one of two things or one of many things, as you can see from this graphic. So generally, when we think about the prime, we're thinking of the direct line between government and the main prime contractor that has that agreement with the government. But you could also be a sub as a second tier, meaning that you are a sub to a sub and so on. That does happen, especially with some of the larger efforts. And so just to keep in mind that as you're going down the line of all of these relationships, to make sure that you are following the best practices that you've heard today, and making sure that you are keeping in mind as how it applies to you as an organization, because essentially your subcontract is a commercial agreement and you're there to support the prime contractor that has the contract with the government. But your relationship with your entity that you're contracting with is technically a business-to-business agreement. Jeff, did you have anything you wanted to add to this slide?
No, I appreciate that. Again, I want to repeat what Dolores just said. This is a commercial contract. And I think Jody mentioned it earlier in this session. You have to remember that you can, as a prime contractor, you can put in requirements that best suit your business. Whether or not you follow the FAR, which, oh, by the way, let's make sure we dispel this myth that, remember, the Federal Acquisition Regulation was actually written for government acquisition officials. It's not necessarily meant for government contractors. The government may put elements and clauses within the FAR within a prime contract, and then the prime contractor then has some required flow down clauses, and then there's some optional flow down clauses. So it's going to be very important. Again, Jody emphasized at the end of her session, read your contract. Well, not only read your contract, get a preview of that contract, and don't be so quick to sign it, and understand that some of those flow downs, which may, the prime contractor may argue as, well, it's in our contract, we must give it to you. It's not always the case. So whether it's an overly burdensome insurance requirement, whether it's the contract type, because the prime has a cost plus contract, does not mean that the subcontract needs to be cost plus. Whether it's a right to audit clause, does that actually make sense given the type of subcontract you have? Pay attention to those flow down clauses, because anything that's in your contract is what you need to follow as a subcontractor.
Awesome, thank you. Next slide. So here we wanted to outline for everyone responsibilities as a prime and a sub, and I don't think we need to delve too much into the specifics here, but again, just to visualize for you everything that the speakers prior to us have covered. And just a quick summary. This isn't all encompassing, but also just for you to see from a prime contractor standpoint, you know, the prime contractor is ultimately responsible for the work that the subcontractor is doing. And what's important here, especially with the, you know, the pricing speakers had noted, is that they're responsible for keeping track of all of the quotes that are coming in, making sure that that pricing aligns with their estimate, and that they're making sure also that they're flowing down the right requirements for clauses, which will then basically be a signal to the subcontractor of what they have to make sure that they're keeping track of. Essentially, the contract file that each the prime and the subcontractor are holding have to encompass all of the work that they're holding. So documentation, documentation, documentation is key here. And I know we've heard that theme over and over and over again over the past few presenters. Additionally, I think what's also important is to make sure that subcontractors are invoicing regularly and that they're invoicing in accordance with their subcontract. One of the stories that I have to share is I was working with a small company not too long ago, and they actually asked me, they said, well, my prime is paying me. Do I really have to invoice them? And I said, yes, please invoice and please make sure you reconcile your invoices to make sure you're being paid the right amount. It's great that money's coming in, but you have to make sure that you're also you're also following your contract. And similar to what the legal presenters had said, you have to read your contract. You have to know what your requirements are. And even if you're getting paid, you need to make sure that you're getting paid in accordance with what was promised to you, and that you're keeping all of that documentation again in your file, because if an audit happens, and I can feel Jeff like scratching his forehead with his experience with audits as well, if an audit happens, all of those documents are going to matter for you from a compliance standpoint. Over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, no, thank you for harping on the documentation standards. I mean, whether if you're a prime, you know, whether or not you're maintaining those documentation in accordance with your certified purchasing system, or if you're just being ready or being on the subcontractor side, you know, why did you make that purchase? Why did you change your travel? You know, whatever it may be, that documentation is going to save you, because ultimately, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself on the audit side, you know, it's that documentation that will be reviewed 2, 3, 4, dare I say 6 years later, and is everyone who understood that documentation that or the events that happen, you know, are they still going to be there and be able to find where those documents are? So it's coming up with a systematic way of organizing your documents, your contract documentation, maintaining a singular way of classifying your contract documents, so that, you know, whoever is in that contracting position, whoever is in those compliance monitoring position, you know, they know where to find all this. So let me talk a bit about, you know, subcontract monitoring and the FAR requirements related to that. Prime contractor, I can't tell you how many audits I've been through where, you know, we'll test a T&M contract and look at the 10 different labor categories are in your prime contract, and you list out those 10 light labor categories. They're well defined within your prime contractor. You've done your diligence and actually flowed that same LCAT descriptions down to your subcontracts. When I come in as an auditor, now putting my auditor hat on, or I have seen this in the past, is, you know, I would ask the question, hey, how did you make sure that your subcontractor was following those 10 labor categories? And I can't tell you how many times I've had folks come back and say, wait, I just trusted them. They said that they're a software engineer 3, and, you know, we accepted it. Or, yeah, I reviewed that resume when we first got it 3 years ago. You know, and, you know, so we figured that, you know, a year later we can upgrade into system engineers 4, whatever it may be. I want to make it very clear. Guess who's going to get in trouble when an audit is done in the future if that labor category requirements were not followed. It's going to be the prime contractor. And yes, your prime contractor should make sure you have those candid discussions, not too different from what Marcia and Mike were talking about earlier. You know, understanding the flow of business, the flow of documentation, how are you going to maintain your compliance with your contract regarding labor categories. I can't tell, there's been way too many cases. There's been false claim actions taken against contractors who don't do sufficient monitoring over the labor categories, whether it's their own or it's their subcontractors. Because you have a subcontractor, you just can't alleviate the responsibility of proper costs and hours being claimed on a contract just because they said so, or well, I looked at their invoice and it looked right. Oh, I've been working with them for a number of years. That person totally has those capabilities. Maintain those resumes. Check on get updated resumes. If you issue a cost type subcontract to a subcontractor, are you asking that subcontractor, hey, can you give me evidence that you have an adequate accounting system? You know, can you give me that DCAA certification that your accounting system is adequate? Can you give me your ACO certification? Or, hey, did you go out and have it assessed by a third-party CPA firm? You know, whatever it may be, it's going to be on you as a prime contractor. If you did insufficient subcontract for monitoring, you're just going to put more audit risk on yourself. You're going to have more contract risk on yourself if you're found to be delinquent in monitoring your subcontracts. And you know, now talking for people who are looking to be subcontractors, you know, look at that proposed subcontract type. Does it make sense for your business? Mike mentioned it several times in his presentation. Do you want to have those additional requirements for that cost plus contract? Is it really required? Is the scope well defined? Do you know exactly what you're going to build? If that's the case, fixed price, ask for it. You can always push back. It's all part of the negotiation. Until that subcontractor is signed off on, you can change the rules. You can change the terms by which you're supposed to follow in order to perform under the contract. So please keep that in mind. And honestly, that subcontract can be an evolving document. You start performing under the contract and you see an overly burdensome term, start having open that dialogue with the prime contracting officer and talk about, well, we're doing this one thing that's making us have too much of a burden and we're incurring so much indirect cost to maintain compliance. Can we talk about something else we can do? So have those conversations, be honest with yourself and understand where how can you lower your risk? I want to get back to Tan's point on that. How do you lower your risk? And that is by monitoring what's in your contract and how you're being asked to deliver. Dolores, do you have anything else on this before we move on?
I was just going to add one thing, just to, again, echo what you're saying is have those conversations, to say that it's okay to have these conversations during your teaming agreement conversations and see how much of this you can negotiate in your teaming agreement, because that could save you, especially if you're talking pricing or if you're talking about responsibilities or contract type. Some of those things you can negotiate there that you can then leverage during your subcontract negotiations. And you can also test the water a little bit with your prime to see, you know, how agreeable are they to working with you. It's a great test of the relationship early on. And you can also, you know, pick up some good signals from what they're giving you while you're discussing those types of arrangements. So just wanted to also add that in, that, you know, sometimes you don't have to wait until the subcontract. You can actually start having some of those conversations prior to the subcontract agreement.
Oh yeah. How many arguments have you seen, Dolores, with work share? How about that topic?
Oh yeah, that has saved a lot of heartache very early on to handle the business side first before going through the teaming agreement negotiations, where it saved hours. If the business people can have the conversation about work share, and if it's a no-go, then it saves time for me as the contract manager, because I don't have to go through the whole, you know, rigmarole of negotiating that teaming agreement if we can't even agree what work share we're going to have.
Exactly. Yeah. Trying to be that arbiter in those rooms can be pretty tough. Yes, well defined in your teaming agreement. It's going to be tough to maintain it in your actual subcontract. I'll say that. But again, developing that relationship. This is a relationship business, and I think a lot of our previous speakers would agree with me there. And ultimately, you guys can work everything out, because one day you're the subcontractor to prime, it's going to be flipped another day. All right, if nothing else on this, let's move to our last slide, we have plenty of time to talk about. How'd that happen? All right, let's talk about audits. Yes, this is my life frequently, but I'm here to tell you, you shouldn't be afraid of an audit. You should expect it. I've had too many times where I started getting on a call with an auditee, whether it was requested by the government or requested by a prime contractor. It's like, what are you doing calling me? What's this all about? And I point them to their FAR clause that talks about the right to audit. That's that FAR 52 section that Susan and Jody unfortunately had to skip over. But let me tell you, those FAR 52 clauses are pretty darn important. And even if they're just addressed in reference only, make sure you understand and see those. And so you should see a right to audit clause if you have a flexibly priced contract. What does that mean, Jeff? That's a T&M contract is deemed a flexibly priced contract. Any cost reimbursable contract can be deemed a flexibly priced contract. Even a fixed price incentive contract can be deemed as flexibly priced. So what could you see as a result as having those contract types? Well, let me talk. So on that case, you're going to be worried more about these, what I would call post-award, meaning after you receive the award of the contract, or at least when the prime gets a contract, and then you subsequently get your subcontract awarded to you. When would you expect those kinds of post-award audits? Well, I'm here to unveil to you maybe a nasty surprise if you weren't thinking about it, but if you agree to a cost-plus contract, and you're thinking, hey, no problem, this is my only cost plus contract, it's with the prime contractor, who's going to come and audit me? DCA can't look at me, I don't have any DoD contracts, or some other CPA firms aren't going to look at me, right? Well, I'm here to tell you potentially wrong, because if you have, again, that right to audit clause is going to keep you open to audit whoever it may be from. And so prime contractors, that's again going back to my subcontractor monitoring cautions from earlier, you got to ask, who's going to be auditing those indirect rates? Who's going to audit those direct costs claimed in your subcontracts? And you want to make sure that subcontract, do they have a direct prime relationship with the contract where the government will be actually auditing them? Or, well, they only have fixed price with the government as a prime contractor? The government's probably not going to do that audit. Guess who gets to do the audit? Prime contractor. Yes, I'm sorry to say that you're likely going to be responsible. And I have worked for several large prime contractors where they've had to learn that lesson nastily. We went to go close out the contract, and the government asked them, hey, what have you done with your subcontractors to make sure those indirect rates were fine? Well, I don't have proof video over it. Well, you're right, but guess what? I didn't audit that contract, the government contracting officer would say, so get to it. So there goes a delayed contract closeout. There goes that fee you were hoping to collect that the government was setting aside to pay to you, and you now lengthen your government closeout, your government contract closeout by maybe many months, maybe a year or more. So be very careful with decisions that are made about contract type and what you're getting yourself into. So same thing for subcontractors, be ready for those audits. And so when you do get that audit call, understanding what the audit is all about, what you potentially could be subject to, you could still be subject to what's called a floor check or labor verification audit. Yeah, you're a subcontractor, you're charging labor hours on a contract, you're sitting side by side with prime contractors and other government folks, on site somewhere. Yeah, a DCA or another audit representative may come around and ask you to see your timesheet and ask you what you've been working on. That's a post-award audit that you could absolutely be subject to. Same thing for if you're buying materials. If you're a subcontractor buying stuff, again, that purchase existence type audit could happen. Let me talk a little bit more about the pre-award side. I think Mike and Marcia referenced about, the potential for certified cost of pricing data. Yeah, you're involved in some kind of sole source change proposal that a prime contractor went through. They're likely going to submit a certified cost of pricing data base proposal that's over $7.5 million to the government, and the government's going to say, well, now that you've been awarded, it's no longer competition. I want to make sure I'm getting a fair and reasonable price. I'm going to go task my DCAA auditor to go take a look to make sure that this is all good. Even if this is a fixed price contract. So not only is the prime subject to a potential pre-award audit, you as a subcontractor could be asked for proprietary data from that government auditor, and you should, a good well-written subcontract should recognize that, and that's why you may have to talk directly with government auditors and tell them about how you built up those indirect rates. How did you come up with that pricing? Again, going back to Marcia and Mike's discussion, maintaining that documentation. How did you arrive to those prices? How did you figure out what labor mix to propose? Did you base it on historical actuals? Did you base it on quotes that you got from vendors that you're working with? There's so many different ways that it can go, but you need to be ready. This should not come as a surprise. So knowing that these audits could happen, I can't guarantee you whether they will or will not happen, but you have to acknowledge and understand that in certain types of situations, you could have an audit. Heck, I'll even give you the fair warning that under competitive source selections, again, read the RFP, because there's new requirements from certain agencies, and I've seen this done now by Department of Energy, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where they put it in somewhat fine print within the section L of the RFP saying, we may send a designated individual or a company or a set of auditors to take a look at your pricing to determine if it's realistic and reasonable and complete. So again, that's another situation where it's probably going to be approached that similar to an audit, asking you for your basis of estimates and how you came up to them. So I think I'm making it pretty clear here, Dolores, that understanding what you're getting yourself into, whether it's via the RFP or via your subcontract, knowing what you could be at risk at from an audit perspective is going to be pretty clear from the very beginning. So when the audit does come, you're ready to support it. And yes, maybe I'm talking selfishly when I'm an auditor, but I'm telling you, for you as a subcontracting official, making sure that you keep your prime happy by being audit ready, that's great. That's only going to help you enable you to succeed going forward. And who should do those audits? Like I mentioned, most of the time it is the government if they have cognizance over your entity. Even when you're a subcontractor, they may do it. But like I said, it could be a representative from the prime contractor. Then what happens if a subcontractor claims an unallowable cost and the prime, pushes that through? Again, I'm going to remind you, that's why prime contractor, do your due diligence. I think we heard that theme several times from the very beginning in the market research sections. Understand what the capabilities of that subcontractor have, and what's the chances that they may submit an unallowable cost through you? Because if they do, guess who's on the line to pay back the government? No, the subcontractor can't pay the government directly. They don't have a contract. That's right, it's going to go through you, prime contractor. And prime contractor, you may have to pay the penalties. Again, this is a case where a properly written subcontract will enable you to get recovery from the subcontractor if that happens. But do you still want to go through that pain of first being assessed that penalty and having to pay back those unallowable costs and interest that may accrue as a result? So here's my fair warning to you. You're not going to be able to do your own audits. I get it. You're not going to be able to prepare for every contingency, right? So your job as a prime contractor is to help reduce risk as best as you can, and to have those discussions and understandings of what the sub will do to ensure that they don't pass through any cost that's not appropriate, and you should be fine. So again, let's talk a little bit about this LCAT monitoring and best practices. Again, I want to remind you that subcontractors, you need to maintain those resumes too. You need to be able to prove out that those individuals were charged in the right categories. Again, you could be subject to audit and have to pay back money related to those hours charged on the contract. And terminations, I would not be, I'd be remiss not to mention that terminations, and I guess in the same categories as changes. And, it's an unusual thing that the power that the government, that the U.S. federal government has, they can essentially terminate a prime contract for almost any reason whatsoever. Whether usually that's for convenience, but they can do it for default if the prime contractor is not doing what they said they would do. In that case, yeah, the government could say, hey, listen, we no longer have the funding. We thought this was going to go 5 years. We're now going to have to cut it off here in the middle of the second year. Well, now what? The prime should have the clause that should enable them to recover reasonable costs for shutting down an operation. Say if you leased a building, that was specifically used for this contract, and oh no, when the termination happened, you're not able to, sublet out that space or, terminate the lease timely, you're now on the hook for a huge liability. Now what? Well, you could be, as a prime contractor, be entitled to recover those costs from the government. What happens if the subcontractor does something similar to that? And there's many different ways you could situations, but the lease is the easiest example that I can give on this webinar, and we can talk about other situations on another webinar. But in the meantime, the prime and the subcontractor need to talk about, what if this contract gets terminated? What will you do? What will we do if that happens? If I'm a subcontractor, will you give me enough time to prepare my claim that you can then provide to the government? So there's certain time parameters that prime contractors have to submit a termination claim, and making sure that the subcontractor does its part, which often is the proverbial long pole in the tent, getting that information, getting the help they need in order to build that claim. It is an iterative process. It's going to take the subcontractor doing its own work. It's going to take a lot of time for the prime and the sub to do its own work, because again, ultimately the responsibility and who submits that termination claim is on that prime contractor. And if that prime, who is, oh, by the way, is certifying a claim, and that claim contains something that doesn't belong there, yeah, there could be problems. In a number of different instances that, if they claim a cost that doesn't belong there, it's inappropriate, it's unallowable, it's unreasonable, many different ways, the recovery won't be as good as the prime had hoped. All right, I think I talked a lot there. Dolores, do you have anything to add on your audit and compliance experience here?
All I would say, I think here, just to wrap it up too, is if you want to do like an internal check on yourself to see if you're following the processes, read the contract, make sure you have all your documentation, make sure you have the file ready, and go through that and see if from an objective standpoint, if you can piece together why decisions were made the way they were made, and if everything matches, the contract mods all match up to the numbers that you have, you've checked the math, all of that. It should be a self-check every single time you get a mod to make sure that you're compliant, that you're consistent. And then if an audit comes, when it comes, you get the notice, and so you can do an internal audit yourself. So rely on the resources that you have within your organization to check those things. And if you need best practices, there's lots of resources for you. And this entire like cohort of speakers here would most likely be willing to help you at least to navigate what to look for first. So audits are fun. Always keep them in the back of your mind. They do happen. They're inevitable, like taxes and death, I guess. So just be ready for one when it happens.
Love it. And Jennifer, my closing remark is just that you are going to make mistakes, and it's okay. If you discover them on your own, say something. And that goes for primes or subcontractors. All right. Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate the time.
Great. Thanks, Dolores. Thanks, Jeff. It was great to have you both on the program today, and a lot of wonderful and valuable content that you've shared with us. So Again, thank you. We've got a list here of all the speakers. Their email addresses were at the beginning of their sessions. All of the PowerPoint is already up and posted on slideshare.net. And today's recording, excuse me, will be on our YouTube channel. If you go over to our website, which is jenniferschaus.com, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a link to YouTube. Just click on that. That should add you as a subscriber to the YouTube channel, and you'll get a notification as soon as today's webinar is uploaded. If you've got questions for any of the speakers on anything that they covered, you can obviously contact them directly. Again, their contact information is on the slides, and the slides are on SlideShare. We'll send that out probably tomorrow morning with those links. This session today kicked off what is going to start next week on Wednesday, where we're going to profile the top 40 federal contractors. You can see the bullet points there at the top, which will be the details that we're going to cover. Here's the schedule, which you can find on our website. So every Wednesday at noon Eastern, these are the companies that are doing the most business with the U.S. government, and we will go through them accordingly there. Each of the registration links is on our website. We do have advertising and sponsorship opportunities, so feel free to check those out. Our spring soiree is actually Monday, March 20th. It's not a Friday, so we apologize for the typo there. Monday, March 20th, we expect about 200 to 250 federal government contractors. We do have opportunities to sponsor the event. We'll give you a table, a couple tickets to the event. Your logo on our marketing materials, which reach about 25,000 plus federal contractors. If you've got questions, you can go over to the hello@jenniferschaus, or on our website, if you go to the event section, you'll find the event listed there. Again, today's webinar was recorded. There's the link to our YouTube channel. And thanks to all of our speakers. I thought they did a fantastic job, and thanks to everybody who took time out of their day to join us for the webinar this afternoon. That concludes our webinar. So thank you, and we'll see you again at another webinar soon.